You're listening to Permission to Shine, the podcast. Stories of overcoming obstacles and finding self-empowerment with Sherisse Bisram, Inner Power Activation Leader. The Oxford Dictionary describes permission as the action of officially allowing someone to do a particular thing, consent, authorization. What if you were that someone and you gave yourself the permission to be everything you wanted to be and more? No more playing small and accepting less than. You are worthy of the life of your dreams, regardless of what it is that you've been through. And honestly, it's exactly what you've been through that has shaped you into the version of yourself that you are now. Like a diamond, you've endured so much, but instead of breaking, you have become stronger and brighter. And if that's not a reason to shine, then I don't know what is. And if nature can do it, then why the hell can't you? You are brave, you are strong, you are powerful, and you are enough. Hear my call and give yourself the permission to shine, because you don't realise how many people are inspired by your light. Hello everyone, this is episode 48 and I am joined by the lovely Nora, who is all the way in Berlin. So hi Nora.
Hello, nice to be here.
Yeah, it's so lovely to have you. And for anyone listening, me and Nora actually connected on TikTok and then again on Instagram. So yeah, it's really nice to just see how social media can be used for good and the power of just helping people, which I think we're both really passionate about, which is super exciting to have you here. So for those that don't know you, Nora, please could you introduce yourself and sort of say what you do and who you are and all the things?
Yes, of course. So first of all, thanks for having me. And so I'm a self-love coach and a hypnosis coach, and I focus basically on the concept that your relationships in your life are always a reflection of the relationship that you have with yourself, right? So if you settle in the relationship with yourself in the way that you self-criticize, you don't really live your authentic self, you don't fully accept and love yourself as a whole, that will be reflected in the relationships you have, right? You attract people that don't see you fully, that don't love you fully. Sorry, I'm a bit out of breath today. But yeah, and I bring this all back to the subconscious. I do a lot of inner child healing, a lot of shadow work, and I basically work with the subconscious. So in the same way that your relationships reflect the relationship with yourself, the relationship with yourself is always a reflection of the relationship that you had in your childhood with your upbringing, with your parents, with the people around you, with the teachers around you. And that's what I do with my clients. We go into the triggers that they have in their lives now, like, for example, they aren't able to take up space. They feel like they always have to hide their light, can't really show up as their true self. And then we go back, okay, where did you learn that you weren't loved for being too much, that you weren't loved for showing up authentically, that you were maybe judged for being too creative, too much, or even too little? So, and then we rewrite that in the subconscious. So this is like just a little bit of what I do, but I think it summarizes it quite well.
Absolutely. No, it's so beautiful. And I was nodding the whole way because you're speaking my language. I mean, you know, in my own work, I do a similar thing and it's just so powerful and so needed and necessary, you know, like or everything you're saying, you know, I constantly say to the audience all the time, I'm like, you know, we are a mirror. So everything we feel internally is projected outwardly. So, you know, that's exactly what you're saying. And, you know, the root of childhood, I don't think people realize how if we don't go back and do that bit, we're just continuously repeating the patterns over and over again, right? And it's so powerful. I see it everywhere all the time that, you know, how people treat others is a reflection of that, you know, and even down to watching people parent now, I can see the little patterns that are happening again. And I'm like, ugh. But, you know, it's not your place to always say, right? And I'm sure that'll be something we cover in a bit later about how we navigate that in our normal life. But tell us a bit about kind of how you got into this work. I mean, maybe your own kind of healing journey. It'd be really interesting to kind of dive a little bit deeper with you.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, oh God, I'm going to see how much I can share in the time we have. But so originally it started for me when I was 19 years old. Like I went through the biggest heartbreak at the time. Like, as you said, you know, you just keep repeating the same patterns. Before that, I would keep choosing men who, or at the time, boys who weren't able to choose me, you know, and I would choose people who would not be over their exes, and I would know it, and I would still continue going into it, you know, because I hadn't done the healing on myself. And then after, dating this one guy, like 1 year on and off, we finally became officially a couple, and he broke up with me, like, I think, I don't know, a month later, like really early on. But it shattered me because I put all my self-worth and all my self-love on the love that I could receive from this guy, you know? And now reflecting back, at the time, it wasn't even real love. It was just pure ego and pure trauma bonding. So, and after that, I really I was suffering a lot, you know, I was really hurting. And I remember just lying there and being like, okay, I can either break over this or I can learn to rise through this. And now reflecting on it, I'm actually really proud of my 19-year-old self to already be able to make that reflection. But yeah, and through that, I came into a lot of coaching methods, a lot of self-help books. I started self-hypnosis and all these different techniques, really, that now I've gathered over the past 7 years, you know, and I'm all bringing together into the coaching space. And it took me a while to actually then become a coach, you know, because I think, I don't know if this is the same for you. I feel like a lot of people in this space have that experience, that I used to be the person at parties where people just talk at me and just tell me their problems. You know, it doesn't matter what age group. And at some point I got to the point where I was like, because I was thinking of studying psychology after school. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know if I was at the phase where I was trying to detach from that role, you know, and not putting all my energy into other people. I mean, going back to my journey with this guy, it was the same journey, you know, like he had like a lot of mental issues, and I was just putting all my energy into fixing him so he could love me. So that's why I kind of detached from that whole like going into helper mode. And then I went into marketing, realized that it didn't fulfill me at all. Took a few years. And then I found my way to coaching. And that's what I do now. And I love it. And back to your question about how self-love was developing in my life. I mean, you probably know it. It's just an ongoing journey. I feel like you always just get to the next level, the next level. But it's basically the most beautiful thing that I've done in my life for myself.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your story as well. And I think that's so poignant that you could even identify that even, then, at 19, because I think, you said a really interesting thing about how that shattered you at that time. And I think what I've seen, over and over again for, whether it's clients or people in my life, is that if we don't have the tools to navigate these difficult things, we do shatter. Whereas when we build our self-worth up so strong that when these things happen, it's just like, okay, there we go, next, or whatever it is, and I think that's a really beautiful place to be in your life, is when you're unwavering in that. And I think I'm constantly reminded of that for myself, like in situations that arise, if something difficult happens or something uncomfortable, and I get through it with ease, I'm like, wow, a younger version of me would have, really struggled with that. Or I was very toxically masculine, so I wouldn't have, shared how I was feeling, and I would have let it eat away at me and then decombusted at the seams. Whereas, this version of me now is so in line with her values, that she shares how she feels and she moves through things with grace. Because ultimately, I think what we're saying here is that when we fix that inner child wound, and we're no longer, maybe if we've experienced a lot of abandonment and things like that, when we're not abandoning ourselves in situations, that's where we stay in our power, right? And I think I was going to ask you, were you the oldest daughter in your family?
I'm the only child. So going back, I mean, if I can definitely go into this, my dad died when I was 8 years old of cancer. And and after that, I was alone with my mom, and there was definitely a lot of enmeshment, you know, and my mom is definitely not the easiest person, so to say, you know, so I had to deal with a lot of ups and down at home, you know, not always feeling safe, and learning very early on, like I have to fix my environment in order for me to feel safe. And that was
Yeah.
actually a huge realization I also had at 19. I was like, holy shit, like the exact same thing that was happening at home is happening now with the person that I choose. And
Yeah.
going back to what you said earlier, I really believe that's when you know you've reached that next level of self-love, when things in your life happen and you're just like, I'm okay. I know I love myself. I know I accept myself as a whole. And I mean, that's the whole point of shadow work. It's not just saying the good affirmations in the mirror and just celebrating all the things that you love about yourself. It's also about looking at the things that you don't love about yourself, right? Like for me, for the longest time, I didn't feel special enough. Like I was always looking at the outside, trying to figure out how I can be like other people. Or I had a big shadow in feeling lazy because of things in school, you know, also with, of course, with my dad dying and dissociation and stuff, and not being the best student that I could have been, you know, in other moments. And I think it's so important to integrate these things and see at the gift that these things bring to you, right? Like when you look at lazy, people who are so afraid of being lazy in their life, they tend to go into workaholism, you know, and they tend to go into burnout. And it's so important to see that the gift in being lazy is taking care of yourself, having self-care. It's all about the balance.
Yeah, and I think, we've had a very similar journey. So what you're saying there, my dad passed away when I was 17, but he was an alcoholic. So, all of that process of what you're talking about, the unsafe environment, trying to create that. And I was the oldest sibling. So then I'm the fixer and I'm doing that. So everything you're saying, I was really resonate with, because I also have that tendency. And I think what kind of, I guess, was my trigger was that I just went completely into fierce hyper independence. So I didn't actually let anyone in. So I didn't have real romantic relationships really properly until obviously I started getting a bit older. I had one when I was really young, and that was before all of that happened. And then the passing away, and I had 11 members of my family pass away back to back. So it was quite a lot of death.
Wow, I'm
And
sorry.
rebirth. No, but it's exactly what you're saying. You just get used to it. You harden your shell, right? And I think that my mentality was exactly the same as yours. People would ask me for advice all the time because I was so full of it. And again, I was trying to avoid being a fixer. And then when you get into those one-on-one connections, I think it's quite easy to do that, isn't it? But I think the older I've got and the more healed I've become, and definitely doing that real deep, gritty inner child healing work that you're talking about. And I absolutely resonate and agree with the shadow work is absolutely necessary. There's no way you can have like indestructible confidence without doing that real gritty work, which I spent years doing. That's really where now I have come to that space of being like, anyone else in my life is an addition. I am full and whole as I am. And I think that's like a really nice space to be, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's when you attract people that are on the same frequency as you, right? Like when I don't know, you have to tell me more in detail what kind of inner child healing you've done. But for me, when I do my hypnosis and I just feel the love of my optimal cosmic parents, that are just there to celebrate me, that let me be creative, that don't push me into boxes, that let me be a child, I then meet people in my life who don't match that frequency. I'm like, ooh, you feel off. Like I don't I don't want that. And I think that's what the whole point of working with your subconscious is, right? Like our brain will always use the synapses that it's used to, that are like it's almost like a pathway that's going the deepest. And the more you work with your subconscious, the more you make new synapses that say you're worthy, you're lovable, you deserve everything you want. And when you've done that with repetition and with emotional intensity, your default goes into that rather than the other thing, because the brain always uses the easiest way. And this is actually something that has really come up with my clients and even friends in the past week. I wonder how that is for you, especially with the eclipse season right now, is getting out of your comfort zone. I think we now live in a world where, like, I'm so pro feeling your feelings and acting in alignment with what feels good to you. But unfortunately, oftentimes what feels good to us is what we already know, right? That's just how our brains are wired. And that's why it is so important to go out of your comfort zone, whilst, in my opinion, at least that's what worked for me and for my clients, do the subconscious work, right? That in correlation is really what I believe brings change in your life. But that also requires sometimes, Yeah, saying goodbye to the relationship that feels like a crazy pull and like home, but doesn't make you happy and you're not treated right, right? Or saying goodbye to the work environment that is toxic, but you're afraid that nothing better waits for you. It's really sometimes about jumping off those cliffs in correlation with doing the inner child work that makes you feel safe from the inside.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, all of everything you said. And I actually have another one to add to that is that I see a lot when people come along that are calm and are peaceful and that love people fully, the person that hasn't experienced that before doesn't know how to handle it and tries to
Yeah,
create chaos or runs
yeah.
because they're not used to it. And it's the same thing, right? Isn't it? If you never experienced that as a child, you'd never know that that's what safety is supposed to feel like. So you'll try to create the chaos and or you'll escape it because you don't know how that is supposed to feel, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's an amazing book that I can recommend. It's called Women Who Love Too Much. I don't know if you've ever read that. It
No.
speaks exactly about that, how we're just called in those drama loops, in those trauma bondings, right? And she uses such an amazing example of how trauma bonding works. It's like you grow up in your family home and you learned a certain dance. Like you can like kind
Hmm.
of like systematic coaching. um, you learned a dance that you dance in your family, right? So for you, that would be taking care of everyone, having everything under control. For me, similar, right? Taking care of my mom and also being used to dancing around the drama, right? I can imagine if you have a dad that was or if you had a dad that was an alcoholic, that there was a lot of like, crazy explosions that you had
Mm.
to dance around. And you learn this dance, and even though it's not the dance that makes you most happy, it's all you know. And then you come out of your family environment and you're out in the world, and then someone meets you that is calm, as you said, and you're like, you don't know you don't know the steps to my dance, that feels weird. I don't know how to dance with you. And then you
Yeah.
meet someone who knows exactly the dance steps to your dance, and you're like, oh, that feels great. That's love for me. That's how I learned my love dance. And I think that's really where we need to just be like, yeah, but that's just what you learned. That doesn't mean that that's in your highest
Mm.
interest. You can change your dance. It will take some time to learn the new dance steps, but you will get the hang of it. And eventually it's going to be a better dance for you.
Absolutely. And that's such a beautiful analogy. That book sounds amazing. I'll definitely have to
Mhm.
look at that and recommend that to a few people for sure. But I think that it's so powerful as well to use it in that sense. Because I think, yeah, we're just so I always say to everyone, we only know what we know. So that's
Mm.
why it's so important that we dive beneath the layers of what we know because our conscious mind will tell us one thing, right? But our
Mm.
subconscious is causing us to act a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what you're saying within the work you do. And I kind of have a similar approach, whereas we dive in, we start to look and unpick the relationships that we had and the things, the thoughts, the feelings that are all connected to that. And then we release obviously as much as we can as possible. But my work's a lot of reframing. So kind of similar, I guess, how you're
Mm.
using cosmic parents. Mine's like, let's go back ourselves and give ourselves that. So
So
it's
is it like
almost
NLP, like the reframing?
yeah, almost. Yeah,
Hmm.
almost for sure. Definitely inspired by that in some form of a way for sure. And then I do use meditation as well, but with
Mm.
ourselves being like the older version of us going back to reparent the younger version. So it's definitely all interconnected, isn't it? And I guess that the outcome is the same and it's still just a beautiful journey, isn't it, through all of that. It's such a
Yeah.
rewarding thing to see, isn't it, to be able to share that with a client. But also I think when you've done it yourself, it becomes almost a second nature, isn't it? Like to just offer that and be there and be that person for someone.
Yeah, and I think that took me some time to realize as well. I think people like you and me, it's basically our hobby, to get into these things and get to the next layer and layer, of course, because of the experiences we've had, right? But for some people, they just can't do that by themselves. Like the way I oftentimes explain like how coaching works, like I mean, for me, coming from having absolutely no self-worth, dating toxic people, like not loving myself at all, just settling in a lot of areas of life to really loving myself and setting boundaries and all of that stuff. It took me a few years, it took me like 3 years to really get to like a solid self-love base. And I had a lot of step backs on the way, which is also normal, right? But I think when you do it in coaching, you can have that journey in 3 to 9 months, I would say, or let's say 6 to 9 months, I think is realistic. And it's just, I think it's the most rewarding thing of them all, really. Like, I sometimes have clients message me a year later and they're like, this has absolutely changed my life, and it's still changing my life every day. And that's exactly the experience that we had in our life, right? And it's just so nice to see that, especially if you have some friends, I'm sure you have the same experience, that don't make these changes in their lives, And going back to what we were saying earlier of being that person that always gives advice and is always there for people. I wonder how that is for you, because I really had to set boundaries with some of the people in my life, like not super close friends, but like friends of my boyfriends, or just, people you meet. I would end up being like in a shadow work session with them at dinner. And it's just like, it's not my responsibility. They're not my clients, and I really had to set that boundary for myself there as well, because there's a huge difference between people who do a first coaching call with you, they're ready, like they want to make that change in their lives, compared to people who are not ready. And I think it's so important to just like be so proud of yourself. I'm sure the people who are listening to this are the people who are doing the work on themselves, and not everyone does that. And you can be so proud of yourself for being there and starting that journey.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I completely agree with you. And I think that's been something I've really learned anyway. I think just in general, like one thing that I used to get really frustrated about was that people would constantly ask my advice. This is before I got into this career. They'd constantly ask my advice and never take it, or never do what I'd suggested. And I was like, you know what? There's a boundary here that I need to create. It's not anyone else's problem, it's mine. And now my thing is always, do you want me to listen, or do you want my opinion? So then that way I'm and obviously opinion is sometimes I say advice, but then I know when I'm getting into a conversation with someone whether they just want an ear or they want my advice. And then when it comes to something obviously deeper, like my actual, work stuff, then I'll just, say, well, I have my journal available, or you can buy my worksheets, or, so I'm like, we can go into it that way. I'll give a couple of prompts if I think it's necessary, but I'm like, I just steer them in the right direction.
And it's so tough sometimes because you see through people's stuff,
Oh, but isn't that the
Like,
worst thing ever though? When you can see it in front of you and you're like,
I
I can't
know.
even tell you. I can't even tell you that you've got this going on. I've got to keep it to myself.
I know, and that's what I've started to do, like to keep it to myself sometimes, because it's frustrating for me as well to tell people and they're not ready to hear it, and it's also not fair towards the people. But like, I had actually a dinner the other day with a friend of my boyfriend's, and she's been going through the same stuff over years, and she's like really is going through the exact same stuff that I've helped clients with, and she's done therapy for years, but nothing is really changing. Because honestly, my opinion, I think therapy is great for starters, but if you really want actionable change in your life, therapy isn't, I mean, most therapists, at least the conservative therapists, aren't the thing, And I was at dinner with her the other day, and she was just starting again of like the same stuff. And at some point I was like, I can really help you with this. Like, I promise you, I can help you resolve all of that stuff. This is my offer to you. I will even give you your money back if you feel like this is not going to work. But that's all I can say from here. I know how to help you, and you know where to find me, but I can't keep on going over the same things and not actually go into the nitty gritty real stuff of it. Like, it's just not.
And you know what I'll say on that as well is the transformations in the transaction, right? So that monetary exchange is when you've paid for that advice, that you want to take it on board. Whereas when it's free, you're like, nah, it's just something. Do you know what I mean? So I think that absolutely, like, well done you for setting those boundaries, especially in those situations where you're around people that you actually care about, and it's hard, isn't it? But absolutely that. And mine's the same. I say the same to a lot of people, and I host events in my area, so that's a lower ticket way of people working with me. So I always say, like, if I always get random people say, my friend's going through this really difficult, what should she do? She should come to my event, it's on this date. Tell her to arrive, tell her to bring her questions, and I'll answer them. And you've got to be that discerning, haven't you? Because I always think that for us, we're naturally empathic, and
Mm.
say our cup is full of all of this beautiful energy and wisdom, but unfortunately we're pouring out so much that we can't pour out unnecessarily anymore, because we
Mm.
need this full cup, one for ourselves but also for our paying clients and our loved ones. So
Yeah.
we can't be giving out excessive amount of ourselves, because unfortunately that does lead to burnout and self-sabotage and all the things, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that's why I also like I have some other friends who are also coaches, and they will like talk about like having an alignment call with someone, and then the person doesn't end up starting coaching and stuff. And honestly, what I always say to them, I don't want to work with anyone that's not ready, you know? Like
No.
I've had a few clients where I felt like they weren't really ready. They were starting coaching even though they weren't ready to look at their stuff. They weren't ready to go deep. And it's not nice. It's not nice for the coach. It's not
Mm.
nice for the client, you know? So, and I think that's kind of how I see some of these friends of friends that you meet around. Like, you have to be ready. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time either. And I can be as good of a coach as I can be. And it will be frustrating for both sides, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think that's really the thing about us as humans, is that our ego is so dense that
Mm,
I think if you're willing to pay someone for their advice or their guidance or support, you have to allow the ego to soften almost, don't you? Because otherwise you'll end up just deflecting what
mm,
someone's trying to guide you through. And especially in this space, when you're hiring a coach or a mentor, it's like their advice is obviously they've come out the other side of whatever you're in. So it's like, let your wall down and let
yeah.
someone help you if that's really what you're trying to invest in.
Yeah, and let someone show you your blind spots, right? I think that's
Mm.
also a huge thing. Like sometimes I work with people that are already working in our sphere, you know, and they make really big progress in some things, but then they will have like really high standards for themselves, for
Yeah.
example, in making the steps even quicker. And when they can't do it, they almost want to procrastinate, right? That's what procrastination is. You're afraid to achieve the thing you want to achieve, so you don't do it at all. And they'll be
Mm.
like, oh, like, yeah, I think I'm not gonna like book the next coaching journey. And then I'll go into it with them deeper and look at their blind spots. And they're like, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm just afraid of, you know, going out of my comfort zone. I'm afraid of not moving fast enough because I have those high standards. And that's why I also still work with coaches once in a while, especially
Absolutely.
about clients sometimes, you know, because you of course have your own stuff that sometimes, you know, gets showed up and you're like, okay, is this my thing, or is this the like, is this
Mm.
you know, the client's thing? And I think it's really good to have people show you your blind spot no matter which
100%.
person you are.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that's almost what a relationship is, isn't it? You know, like even outside of the coaching space, in like any relationship, is that other person is a mirror to the thing that you can't see. So if
Mm,
something's triggering you in that situation, that's a sign that you need to do that work to figure out what it
mm,
is. But especially in the mentor and coaching space, I think that it would be very hypocritical as a coach or mentor to not being coached or mentored yourself. I think that there has to be an element of you that is
yeah,
also investing in this to an extent, because you believe in what you say, right? And you're doing what you
yeah,
say. And I think that's a really big thing of mine. Like I wouldn't say, maybe a red flag is the hypocrisy. Like I'm very much a person that will say what I will do. So I think for
yeah,
me, in lots of situations, whether it's mentors or it's people, relationships, if someone doesn't do what they're going to say, for me, that's an immediate like, don't know how I feel about that. It sort of like
yeah,
shows me lack of trust, because then it
yeah.
means, but then self-trust is such a big thing, you know, and I think a lot of people
Mm,
don't trust themselves. And I think with clients, again, like with the procrastination thing, um, we're in our own way, aren't we? Just
mm,
all of us are in our own way to some degree. And I think this is why this work is just so important. It's really lovely actually to hear your journey, and so in alignment with what it is you do, because I think sometimes I meet coaches that are on the surface level, and sometimes I'm like, but why do you do that? But why do you do that? And I'm trying to understand
mm,
why, but I can really feel from you that this is everything. And I love that, because I equally am, you know, in the
yeah.
same ship as you, you know, are really an advocate for this work, which is really beautiful. But we did kind of cover, you know, like the fact that the self-love journey can be hard and there are some setbacks within that. What would you say the most constant one is for you that kind of comes up maybe from your childhood, or like, yeah, just like, I know we've kind of covered it loosely, but what would you say that one thing is that you've always got to kind of work through?
I think it's, I feel like it's more that new stuff comes up. Like, I don't feel like I have, actually, no, when I think about it, there's one thing where I feel like that I've had to like really deal with now that I'm kind of in my own business and everything, like running my own business and doing a business that is, not very, not conservative is the word that I'm looking, conventional, at least in Germany. I think England is a bit more open and is a bit more individualistic. I feel like in Germany, you have a lot of like the very old school narrative still around like self-employment and stuff. But what I was kind of touching on earlier is like in school, I actually found out recently that I am probably on some ADHD scale, and I think it's actually gotten much better over the years. But in school, like I had just moments I couldn't focus. Like I would sit in school and I would be like, okay, you pay attention today. And I couldn't focus. And I still did my A levels and all of that, but I really felt like I wasn't smart, and that's what the school system really reflected to me. And it was really tough. And that's something that I have to work through over and over again and go into the inner child healing of being in an environment. Like sometimes, just for people who haven't done hypnosis, like I'll imagine in my hypnosis is that I'm in a school where like coaching is a class, and I'm just really good at it and stuff, like to boost that self-confidence. And I think that's really the one that recently I've been having to work on again and again. Like I think when I started shadow work, I was going into those things. And now I'm going into it from a different perspective and really celebrating that individuality, and not that general knowledge, but more that like going into the things. And that's what ADHD is for a lot of people, right? Like there's so many stuff you don't care about, but then you have one thing that really lights you up and you're just hyper focused and yeah.
No,
So
absolutely.
that's a vulnerable one, but that's definitely what has been coming up.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think there'll be a lot of people that resonate with that completely. And I think, the rise of us speaking about ADHD, I've realized so much how many people in my life do have ADHD. And I equally think that I have like I'm on the spectrum for it too, like myself. And I think that I probably was more so when I was younger. And I think as I've gotten older and I've developed kind of coping mechanisms just through structure, that I can see how I've prevented myself from spiraling more, which has been, interesting. But obviously, I think, that I use astrology a lot. So for me, I've got a Capricorn moon. So I like structure. So in my mind, everything is kind of in a space so I can dip in and out of it. But the schooling system thing has been a massive part of my work and my journey, because I absolutely agree with you. I think because I've always been creative, I wasn't good at maths, wasn't really great at science, but I enjoyed doing like experiments and stuff. I wasn't awful at it, but my grades at school, I struggled to get, the very like
straight A's.
Yeah, I think I got a 1B and the rest was C's. So I did, I worked really hard for that. But then when I went to university, because I was doing something I enjoyed, that's when my like intelligence really spiked. And I was like, oh, I'm not dumb. I just wasn't learning anything I enjoyed. So then that way I could see that for sure. And I think that's one of the reasons actually I invested in my business mentor last year, was because I was humble enough to be like, this isn't my forte. I don't know what I'm doing. So actually let me get someone on board that does know what they're doing. And I think that was like my first step of stepping out of my ego to think that I could do it all myself, to be like, okay, let's let someone in. And as I said, that was very, my narrative has always been toxic masculine for obviously reasons in my childhood. So my inner child healing journey was really about connecting with that inner feminine and like letting my walls down, softening, which I feel like I'm in a balanced space now in my life, which has taken a really long time to get there. But I guess on that kind of note, what would you kind of say was, looking at your journey, was there a real moment where you did give yourself that permission to shine and be your full self?
There was so many moments, I feel like, but the first moment was definitely, when I was 19, after going through that heartbreak and really getting into all these podcasts and really like, I made a list, and that's one of the easier exercises that I think are still very potent, writing a list of all the things that you love about yourself and really writing like I love that I'm communicative. Like I love my hair, like going on everything that you can think about, like as superficial and as deep as you can go, really anything. And I would read that out to myself every day. And that was really just the celebration phase. And yeah, I think it was really that time of really finding back to myself, connecting to my emotions, because going back to ADHD, right? Like a lot of people with ADHD, you learn to dissociate. Like Gabor Mate talks about this so much, of when you have a skiing accident, for example, and you break your leg and people are around you who can help you down, you will feel the pain, you'll scream, and people will come to help you. But if there's no one there to help you, you will you will dissociate from your pain, and you will still be able to drive or to, I don't know how you say it in English, to slide down the mountain.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So for people who hear me, I'm originally German, so that's why sometimes I still miss some words.
No, it's amazing. I mean, for me, anyone that's Duolingo, I'm high five to that. It's incredible.
So, and you will still slide down the mountain even with a broken leg because you dissociate from the pain. And I think that was a huge step for me as well, connecting to my emotions, because that was also something that in the past led me to just keep staying in toxic relationships and playing games with the person, but also with myself, you know?
Yeah.
So I would say that was the moment where I was really able to shine my light, when I was really, truly able to connect with my authentic self for the first time and really allowed myself to connect to my emotions the first time, setting boundaries. And then also going back into dating, like that was so fun. At the time, I heard a podcast where someone said, you're going to love the sound of your steps walking away from someone who is not able to value you or who's not good enough for you, basically, you know? And I think that was this whole time, like I was just like vibing. I loved it.
Yeah, that's so nice. And I love that whole concept because I think it's really about, I talk about alchemy, and I feel like that was your alchemy moment, where you took that pain of, what the surface level experience was, but also you looked down into the root of where it started, and you really started to, I like to say de-weed, you pulled out all the roots and everything that was in your pathway, and then you've, relayed new soil and planted new seeds, and you're nurturing them through all the work that you were doing. And I think that's really just so important, isn't it? Like that real work. And I think, as we said before, this is something that we continue to have to do for our whole lives. There's never a situation in our life where we'll be like, cool, so I've finished healing now, I'm complete. You know, that's never going to happen.
And I really think it always comes back to coming closer to your authentic self. Because now, while you were saying that, I was like, okay, another moment that comes to my mind is when I started coaching, especially with like I was good at my other jobs, but they never lit me up. So I never wanted to put in the extra work for them. And since I started like coaching and hypnosis and all these things, I'm just thriving in it. And that was also a moment, especially after school experiences and feeling like I was never like the best in class or whatever. That was also like a really beautiful moment of being like, wow, like I found my thing. Like I'm really good at this.
And I think a really beautiful part of, for both of us in this, is that it's not about necessarily the education that you obtained, but more about who you are that finds this. And this is what I try and tell people, because so many people, you probably have the same thing, ask me, how do I find my purpose? Like how do I find, I'm like, you are your purpose. It's you, and I think there's no other way to say that other than just what we're listening to now, right? It's both of our stories and how we've forged this pathway through acknowledging every part of ourselves and accepting it, and using that as a guiding light for people that are still in the dark, right? I think that's just
Totally.
it.
And I think your purpose can also change. I don't know what's your human design, but I'm a manifesting generator. So we're basically here to have different purposes, and they will all come together. And like I was a yoga teacher for a couple of years. I still sometimes teach a few yoga classes. That still plays into the work that I do, that helps me connect to the body, helps people connect to the body and all that stuff. And I think it's not It's so funny. I don't think I ever really like searched for my purpose. I think it's
No.
really about finding what lights you up in the moment. And that also starts with being really honest with you about what doesn't light you up in your life,
Yeah.
right? Like where do you feel numb, where you feel empty after interactions with people, after work environments, anything that you do, right? I think it's
Mm.
and that's why it's so good to touch in with your body. It's really
Yeah.
the guiding light.
Absolutely, that is tuning in, isn't it? I think there's so many external factors that could guide you in a different way, but is that really who you are and what you want to do? Like that's why we have intuition and gut feelings, right? I think,
Mm.
and that's another thing that I feel like is again something that could trick you, is that sometimes your mind can tell you something, but your body's like, no, that this is what feels right. Like, why are we in conflict? Like so many people I meet are like, I feel this way, but I think this, and I'm like, whoa, there's too much going on. Like in that moment,
Mm.
you need to get still and listen. All
Yeah.
right, let it out some form of a way. It's just, I think it's such a beautiful open space, isn't it? This work is like never ending and it's always
Yeah.
evolving. And I think when you choose to dive into this beautiful pool that's a kaleidoscope of colors, your journey will take you down different pathways, but ultimately the journey is always the self, and you're always in that pool of yourself. And I think that
Yeah.
unless you dive in, you'll always be sort of looking over the surface, or
Yeah.
wondering what if, or feeling confused and lost, because actually who you are is in that pool. You just got to dive into it.
Exactly. And I think that's why, unfortunately, in the space that we work in, there's a lot of people that follow toxic positivity,
Yeah.
and you cannot really truly feel your positive, quote unquote. And I'm saying quote unquote because I don't really think there's positive and negative emotions. They're all there for a reason. But you cannot feel the positive emotions, the joy, the happiness, the love fully if you don't allow yourself to feel the grief, the sorrow, the disappointment sometimes. And I think, especially through the last couple of months with the eclipse going on, I think a lot of people had to learn that. And also at the
Mm,
beginning of the year, it's okay to sometimes go through moments of frustration and to feel sad about things and to feel overwhelmed by certain things. It's just about allowing yourself to feel that and then figure out steps to move out of that. But you can't overstep that point of feeling it because otherwise you're
absolutely.
missing a huge step.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say you've got to go through. You just got to go through the middle of it.
Yeah.
There's no side route. There's no over or under. It's through the middle, and
Yeah.
it feels like you can't see where you're going, but you just have to trust that every time you ask those questions or dive in deeper, it's for a reason and a purpose.
Yeah.
And even with the eclipses, the universe is guiding us. Like I think that this was a moment where we had to let go of control, and I think a
Mm.
lot of people struggled with that. um and that was the real test. The universe was like, okay, let me shake things up a little bit, because we're still in the portal at the moment. So until we kind of get to the end of April, we're still going to be in these weird shadowy feelings and emotions. And all of the guidance that I kind of have been taken in is the fact that we have to just surrender to this process. Whatever's coming up needs to come up to be released. And it's like we are in between two worlds right now, the old patterns, like we said, or the new. And it's whatever you're doing in this time to release and carve out that clear pathway is going to serve you. Whereas if you're trying to cling on to the old, that's why it feels even harder. So yeah, it's just it's all interconnected, isn't it, always?
Yeah, and that's where even shadow around certain emotions comes up, right? Like a lot of us have learned in our home. I mean, especially for women, we learn to not feel angry, right? Like we learned we get attention when we feel sad or hurt, maybe. Like some of us, for some people, it might be completely different. And we learn to have substitute emotions. Or for like a lot of men, what I see is they learn to be seen when they're angry, but they didn't learn to be seen when they're hurt or sensitive. So every time they feel hurt or sensitive, they get angry instead of actually feeling the real emotions.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that's just such a big thing. Like, let yourself be guided by your emotions and don't put them into categories of good or bad. They're all here
Yeah.
to guide you. It's all just a compass. Like, I had a session with a client the other day where she really had this like problem with feeling what was the word? It was really in German. It was like the translated word is like dried up, like a haggard dried up, like sometimes in some situations she felt like that. And in the end, we figured out like, if she doesn't allow herself to feel that, she misses the compass that shows her that certain scenarios, activities, people make her feel that way, And if she doesn't have that compass, if everything lit her up in her life, where would she go? Like she wouldn't know where to go.
100%. I completely agree with you on that. That's exactly it. I always say that we can't eradicate any part of us. It's all necessary, isn't it? And, like the ego and the fear is a part that loves you the most. But equally, sometimes the ego needs to be taken off its pedestal and nurtured and loved itself. So then in turn, it doesn't try to steer you away from the things that are right for you, like going for that job interview or going for that exciting holiday. You're scared to go. That's your fear, because you've never had that before, or you've never seen that happen for anyone before, so you're scared to do it. But actually, on the other side of that fear is the most incredible experience and opportunity that you are denying yourself if you don't do the work to get there. So I could talk to you all day, Nora. I feel like there's so much more we could talk about, but I feel like I'll get you back on and we'll talk about more another time for sure. But I feel like if anyone wants to work with you, what would be the best route?
So the best route to connect with me is on my Instagram account, nora.ring. That's where you find in my link tree, like in my bio, you find everything how you can work with me. Of course, I do one-on-one coaching. That's my main thing, how I help people. But you have like lower tiers of my self-love circles. They're once a month online. The next one is on the 28th of April. So on a Sunday at 6:30, Central European time. So depends where you're listening. And then I have free hypnosises that you can listen to. And I actually also always do a first free session. So if you feel like you want to connect with me, you have like an important topic that you want to dive in, no strings attached. Like this is something that I've started recently. I don't know how you deal with that, but I really feel like I know I'm confident in my work. I know I can help people, and I think everyone should have the right to try it out and see how it works for them, and then make a decision if they want to continue. So if you want to do that, feel free to book yourself a 60-minute free session with me.
Amazing.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I love that so much. And please do send me all of your links and I'll pop them in the show notes, so then everyone has access to that too. It's been so wonderful having you. And I think my kind of last thing I always do is like a little bit of a soul to soul message. So, based on the conversation, or maybe something your inner child wants to say and share, like what is your soul to soul message?
I think the message is really allow yourself to be who you are, allow yourself to go on that journey and figure even out who you are without all the expectations and layers that society, your upbringing, sometimes even religion has put on you, because that's really where the magic lies, when you can truly just shine your unique light without being afraid of how the outside world will react. And that's really how you create beautiful connections and sort anything out that doesn't align with your true soul.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me, Nora.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love the conversation. We definitely have to meet up sometime when I'm in London again.
100%. Thank you.
If this episode resonated with you, please do like, follow, and share with someone that you know would benefit. If you're looking to dive in deeper to becoming your most unapologetic, most authentic, shining self, please do head to my website and join my newsletter, where you will find out about all of my upcoming events and speaking opportunities and all of the things that I have going on. And also, if you would like to work with me, please do drop me a DM on any of my socials or through my website. Love and light.